Maggie Campbell is back again, which we're all very excited about, to teach us about technical tasting. I know, like me personally, this is an area where I have always felt like miles behind when it comes to trying to articulate what I'm tasting in a spirit. So I'm really excited about this topic. But my name is Will Hookinga, by the way, from American Rum Report. And as I said, I'm here with Maggie Campbell, President and Head Distiller at Privateer Rum. Maggie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I know we were just talking right before this kicked off. I know it's been an eventful time at Privateer because y'all are getting ready to release your 2020 Distiller's Drawer releases, which are very special bottlings you do every year. And I'm going to go ahead and put a link up underneath the video for everyone where you can, it's a page on Privateer's website. You can put in your order for curbside pickup, or like me, if you're not nearby, there's also a link to an online retailer, sealbox.com, that ships to over 20 states, which I'm very grateful Tennessee is one of those because I already ordered a couple of bottles. So I'm going to display that now for everyone watching, and you should be able to click through to that. But before we get started, I see we already have a lot of people chiming in the chat.
It's so good to see so many of you guys.
I know, yeah, it's awesome. People from all over. I think we're about to break 100 people, so that's great. So obviously say hello to us over in the chat. If you have a question at any point during the presentation, we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. There's a little button you'll see at the bottom middle part of your screen that says ask a question. That's the best place to put it to make sure we see it. I'll be keeping an eye on those. Also, feel free to share the event. There's a button at the top right where you can invite your friends to come join us. And yeah, with that said, Maggie, I'll turn things over to you now. Oh, and I guess I should go ahead and pour myself. I actually have a Distiller's Drawer release with me because I know I want to be able to taste in real time as you're teaching us about technical tasting. So
yeah, so anyone who's listening, if you need to take a second to grab a bottle and a glass, what glass it is you typically taste out of, grab a glass and we'll get started. So I have, you can tell this is my lab sample. It's like, a distiller when none of their bottles are labeled.
Right.
Even my bottle of Great House from Hamden has a laboratory label on it.
I think I saw that you posted a picture of that, and I was like, "Oh, that is so cool." I was jealous. Yeah,
I posted it, and then it was like my phone a little bit exploded, and I was like, "Christelle, do you want me to take that photo?" So yeah, I've got the Les Alliances, which will be coming out, which I'm really excited about. That's the cognac cask.
Awesome. Yeah. And this one that I have, this was a Queen Share release. I don't remember the age on it, but I do know it's delicious. So I'm excited to have a little bit during this.
Good. Yeah. So yeah, let's kick off. I have very, boring technical slides. Sorry, everyone. I'm like an information dense person. So
I think minimalist is the term to go with here.
I'm very minimalist. Yeah, I'm a distiller through and through. So yes. If you'll pop us onto the first go, let's yes. So tasting philosophy, I would say some of the things I get asked most often, should I eat anything special? Should I not eat anything? Should I use a certain type of glassware? How should I taste? What should I use? And so for me, I use the exact same glass I use to drink every beer, every champagne, every wine, and even my spirits. And I know this could blow out a lot of people's noses because it would allow a lot of alcohol vapor, but being someone who tastes still-proof spirits, not uncommonly for me, it's like not that big a deal. And this was something I learned in the Masters of Wine, is to taste everything you taste, especially technically, out of the same glass. And that really just gets you going on getting that sort of standard thing. And then another thing I did like 15 years ago when I first started was I would take so this is a Riedel Overture Red. They're not that expensive. I can break one and I'm okay with it. I don't own, even as a Master of Wine student, I don't own any of those $800, $100 stems. Like, I don't need them. I'm going to break them. The beaker I use at home for my wine decanter is an Olmeyer flask that you find in a laboratory because it'll be fine in a dishwasher. And it works great and it doesn't drip. There's no drips or streaks when you pour. So yeah, like for me, I'm all about like what's practical. And so this like Riedel Overture is just super, super practical. I feel really comfortable using it. And I use it for everything. And I usually buy these by like the 18 pack.
Oh, wow.
And so I'll leave like 6 of these on the counter. And something I started 15 years ago is I'll take like a fresh strawberry. Like right now we're in the height of strawberry season, right? Put a fresh strawberry in one, put fresh rhubarb in the next, because we're at the height of rhubarb season, maybe a spring turnip in the next, etc. And go through and smell them a few times during the day. And then the next day, as they start to dry out and desiccate, smell them. And then the next day, as they dry out and desiccate even further, start to smell them. And that's a really good way to just sort of practice linking those things in your brain. This is what a brand new, fresh, ripe strawberry is like. And you might even put like a less ripe strawberry in the next glass, one that's got like a lot more white on its shoulder, and smell that next to it. What's an underripe strawberry? And that'll start to teach you some of the things we're going to talk about later as far as like the development of flavor through maturity and also through certain distilling and aging conditions. So for me, it's keep it simple. That's one practical way to learn. Also, I always support the WSET classes. If you see this sheet move, my cat is playing with my curtain right now. We knew this would happen. I think it's adorable.
Yeah, it's just to add drama and character to the presentation.
Right. Let's just pretend I'm on like a sound stage and there's a fan. It's great. He's mimicking a thunderstorm. WSET has classes if people want to learn how to technically taste, and their SAT, Standard Approach to Tasting. If you just Google WSET SAT, it'll take you to the page with those forms that are just good to look over. That's how they systematically taste every single thing in their program. So that's just some hint on philosophy stuff. So yeah, let's pop over to the next one. Flaws. So when we're smelling and tasting, I see a comment about spaghetti. Yes, spaghetti is the best, guys. He's our executive producer. He's taking care of us. So flaws. When we're smelling and tasting, of course, we're always asking ourselves, one of the first things I do when I smell, I'm like, is there a flaw? Am I catching a flaw? And first thing when I taste, I just want to say, is there a flaw or is it good? Like, is it sound or is it flawed? And that just like allows my brain to take the next step. So that's always what I'm asking myself first. What is a flaw? This is something distillers and winemakers and beer brewers and coffee, roasters could debate all day long. For me, I sort of define a flaw when it goes beyond the intention of the producer. I might have this really wild spirit that's got a lot of wild yeast to it. It's got like a certain really volatile nail polishy note, but it actually kind of fits with the groove of the wildness of the spirit. Because maybe it was wild yeast fermented and it got a little Brettanomyces yeast, and those tend to make those flavors. So maybe it's part of the character that they're trying to weave. Or maybe I'm getting this really clean, silky, sort of clinical structured, very, consistency driven spirit, and it has this weird nail polishy, aggressive top note. That to me, it's not what they intended. It is a mistake. And of course, that intention, assuming people's intentions from what you're perceiving of the style, that just comes with a lot of tasting and a lot of questions and getting to meet and talk to some of these producers. If I get a really cloudy spirit and it's got all these funky fermentation esters, I know they're going for this more wild style. And so I'm going to allow for a lot more room in something I might in like a shimmery, bright, really kind of clean and clinical nose. So what is a flaw? Big, long discussion. Flaws in spirits. Sulfur, it's going to smell like a matchstick or like a rotten egg. It's a good reminder that 1 in 5 people of European descent are actually physically unable to smell sulfur. They're missing those genes. So it's really important in our industry that people, get tested for that ability, especially if they're working with old wine casks, which can often have a sulfur taint. Really high volatile notes like that nail polishy, aggressive-y, vinegary stuff. Furfuryls, fusel oils. There's a big long list of them. And I might shoot you for your Instagram stories for American Rum Report.
Yeah.
Some slides on these flaws, just so people can know, because that could be an hour-long seminar. In and of itself, where does mousy character come from? When is geosmin, which is the aroma of minerality? When is it like a delicious treat? And when is it like, this is spoiled grain, it smells like wet dirt, geosmin? So there's all these layers of when does a flavor become a problem? And how do we balance those problems? So that's number one when I'm smelling and tasting. Does it smell messed up or not? Expanding your vocabulary. This is probably the number one thing that is so important. You have to know the thing to see the thing. You have to know what soursop tastes like. You have to know what sour fruit tastes like. You have to know what dried honeysuckle smells like, or what fresh honeysuckle nectar tastes like. I sometimes get teased because a flavor I love in rum is, I know Richard Seale has his own name for this flavor, but I call it like white gummy bear. And I can't share that with a lot of people who culturally did not maybe grow up with white gummy bears, right? So I have to be like, it's sort of this, dry, like candied pineapple, gel flavor.
What is Richard's term for that? I think, did you say that he has his own version?
Yeah. I've heard him say like there's like a little like cotton candy flavor.
Oh, interesting.
That's actually really good. All these words sound like a terrible descriptor for it, but actually it's a really good flavor. And distillers, like we all know, like as soon as he says that, I'm like, I know exactly what you mean, and I totally agree. Like it has to be in balance, but yeah, we all have our little codes for what does this taste like. Does it taste like an underripe kind of bitter banana, or is it like a fresh ripe banana, or is it a really overripe banana? And just learning these words. And obviously, if one of the things I like about WSET is they have a standard category of flavor descriptors that you can find on their SAT. That way, like they're very culturally understood globally. So if I'm working with a distiller in Japan and we're exchanging notes, I know that I can write a tasting note that they will understand. And I'm not saying things like, I can say, honeydew melon, very globally understood. I'm not saying something like, kettle corn, which maybe they don't know. So yeah, it's sort of what is a useful descriptor, what is kind of a ridiculous descriptor, and what is a global descriptor. But just learning them and knowing them and expanding your palates, seeing what a Zanzibar clove tastes like compared to a Ceylon clove, or Vietnamese cinnamon next to a more traditional Ceylon cinnamon and things like that. So Grenada nutmeg, so famous for their nutmeg because it smells different. So getting to know all those different flavors. And I often think in categories, like I'll smell something and I'll be like, this is dark fruit. And I know for me, okay, then I start sorting through, is it plum? Is it black fig? Is it cherry? Or is it black raspberry? Oh, wait, it's totally black currant leaf, And then like golden fruit is kind of its own thing. So when I taste, I actually see like a lot of colors and categorize by colors. And then that tells me what descriptors to start pulling from and what to think about. So tasting with others as they describe, especially people who are more qualified tasters, it's some of the best opportunities you can get. Just listen to them while they talk and look for what they're saying. It's a really great way to learn. All right. So let's hop over to style and intention. Perfect. So we talked a little bit about this, it's hard to assume. Yeah, thank you, Rob, for posting that link for WSET. Just saw that pop up. Thank you. Yeah, so style and intention, is this what they intended? You can kind of pick up some clues throughout the spirit to say, is this clinical or is this overtly characterful? Is this subtle and elegant? Is this like full throttle and powerful? And kind of start to pull together like, what was it that this is trying to communicate? And does it hit the mark, or does it seem disjointed and unharmonious? I think a big reason why at Privateer we do very minimal intervention is like the yeast know what they're doing, the still knows what it's doing, And if I get in there and I start overly manipulating it, I feel like it loses some of that harmonious balance that it just came into the world with. So we're very minimal intervention. And if you're filtering, how is that going to change the texture? And will that texture now be appropriate to the aromatics? Maybe not. Maybe it will. Maybe the aromatics are so subtle and delicate, a nice chill filtering gives it that leanness on the palate, and that actually is what you want. So yeah, does it feel like it's a coherent spirit that knows what it's doing, or does it feel a little bit of a mess? Were these choices made to hit the mark, or were these choices made somewhat in isolation to kind of be a little bit of a mess? And I think this is a much bigger question for emerging producers, obviously, who maybe don't have the cultural context for what is natural, and been around forever. So yeah, if you'll hit the next one.
And Maggie, real quick, one question and one thing I'm curious about, when you're sitting down to taste something and, try to be analytical about it, do you try to get as much information as you can going into it? Or do you like to taste it first and then maybe read up on production notes? Or I'm curious, if you have a process for that.
This is a great question. Actually, just last weekend, another local distiller left me a sample at work for me to go pick up. Contactless curbside pickup.
Nice.
And they were asking me for my feedback. And so I said, they said, how much information do you want? And I said, go ahead and send me a file or an email. Make sure you mark it clearly, because I'm going to taste it first, not knowing anything. And I do a lot of deductive tasting. Okay, what temperature do I think this was fermented at based on the flavors and the esters? What kind of still do I think this was distilled on based on, the structure and the texture? What kind of aging conditions are there based on, do I get a lot of lighter, more volatile alcohols? So younger age or less evaporation, or, just kind of looking, how fresh are the flavors, or do they taste matured? And then I like to find out how they made it so that I can see, are you showing me what you did, or is that work not showing up the way you want it to? And for me, for doing a technical feedback, that's the way I like to do it. I like to say, because, if we're spending all this time and energy trying to mature a spirit a certain way, but it's not showing up in the spirit due to whatever condition. And that's when we put on the detective hat and say, okay, what happened? What are you trying to do? How do we get there? It's good for me to do it that way. So I think that when, I first started tasting, it was really important for me to get to know the classics. This is Four Roses, Buffalo Trace, Jim Beam. Jim Beam has a little bit more rye, and so does Four Roses. You get that little spicy florality. And, for me, Buffalo Trace is much more back palate. It's got that tasty caramel corn thing going on the back palate. And, and then if you smell kind of any bourbon in the world, you have an idea of what okay, I'm going to go philosophy, the teleological, the telos of what bourbon is. What is bourbon in our collective understanding versus what is this bourbon trying to tell me? It doesn't have to have typicity and be typical to be good, but what is this bourbon telling me about what it thinks it is as a bourbon? Because they put bourbon on the label for a reason. So yeah, for me, it's when I first started learning, I liked to know a lot about the spirit, so I could learn what those indicators were. And now, 15 years later, I'm much more interested in what can I get out of it? Did the work show up? And if it didn't, do I need to spend that much money for that work? So yeah, it's always an interesting one. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's always interesting to me how information can change my perception of something. So yeah, I was just curious to know kind of how you approach that. If it's good, to know going in, or to wait until after.
Yeah, and I see a little aside over in the comments about what do I mean by confidence. That is one of those tasting terms that comes in time. I think once you taste enough spirits, technically, you can taste, is this spirit settled in itself? It knows what it's doing? Or does it taste nervous and it can taste nervy. And nervy can be good because it can be energy, but nervousness is not good because it can have that flavor. And that's just something that'll come with time. And learning the word first means you can start to look for it. And that just takes time to develop. So yeah, if that sounds like a strange term, for me, when I'm especially tasting wine, like a really great wine will just be well drawn together and confident. And you just know they know what they're doing. And it puts you at ease as a drinker. And maybe, you know, someone at a bar might not be able to identify all that stuff, but they're still picking up on something, even if they can't name it. And I think that makes a big difference. I think in Privateer's rums from the earlier batches to now, like 8 years ago to today, you can taste the change in confidence. And that for us was a big part of the change from true American to this now New England Reserve. It's just bigger, bolder, more confident, more powerful rum because we're a lot more, we know who we are better. We know who's drinking our rum better. And we can just be a lot more expressive and a lot more comfortable in our own skin expressing it. So hopefully that clears up that aside. So tasting for structure, so much more informative than a list of flavors. If I said, oh, this tastes like white pepper, lemon, and almond, that could be Irish whiskey, that could be bourbon, that could be a cognac, that could be a rum. It doesn't really tell me anything. I'm not a huge one for just listing a bunch of flavors without much context. It helps a lot of consumers who are thinking in terms of, you know, I like this flavor, I don't like this flavor, or this one has a lot of darker flavors and this one has a lot more, you know, bright, fresh flavors. I think those are helpful terms. But as far as like, oh, it tastes like orange marmalade, I'm like, that could be any spirit in the world. So that could be a white rum, that could be a 30-year-old scotch. So for me, it's sort of like I just kind of like to pair those descriptors with structure. You know, is it really, really broad and really richly textured like a Hamden? Or is it more linear like a Danku? Is it really like knit and tight and energetic? Like for me, the Foursquare rums are really well knit. They've got that energy. It's knit together. It's driving down the palate. Whereas something like Hamden or Worthy Park is going to be a lot more open and broad on the palate. You know, is it really firm? You know, for us, our Navy Yard is a very firm spirit on the palate, like it hits your palate like that. Whereas the Queen Share is going to be a lot more supple and soft and cloudy, the way you're perceiving that texture across your palate.